Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today. So I wanted to come back and kind of do a long-term ownership update on the 2018 Husqvarna FE 350 and really just break down the associated costs with owning this bike for over 200 hours and kind of what that looks like on an hourly basis. This kind of breakdown would apply to like the year 17 through 19 of the FE 350. And it would also carry over to the KTM side for the 350 EXC-F on the same year, since those are pretty similar bikes and there's not many changes through those years on the bikes. So wear items and maintenance intervals are going to be pretty much the same, if not the same, between those two. So before we get into this breakdown, why don't we go take a look at the bike and see what it looks like after 2 years of riding it in over 200 hours. Alright, so it doesn't look half bad after that 213 hours and the 5+ races that it's been in, and just the amount of riding I've done and the riding that I do. It looks pretty good. So without any further ado, let's kind of get into the totals and the costs associated with running this bike for over 200 hours. Now I've got my phone here with the kind of cost breakdowns, so we're just going to go through it. Let's start with the very first thing, and that's oil changes. Now, oil can vary. I stuck with the Motorex 1050 full synthetic, and that's around $18–20 per liter, and then if oil filters around $8. So we figure about $27 to $28 for an oil change. And now I've done oil changes every 10 hours on this bike. It's just peace of mind for me, and gives me buffer room in case I extend that out a little bit, and I wanted to make sure this bike lasted as long as possible, so cheap insurance to do it every 10 hours. That cost comes out to $540 for oil changes. If you do it every 15 hours after that first hour, you're looking at about $381 in oil changes if you're buying full synthetic, either the Bel-Ray or the Motorex. The next segment is tires. Now, I've gone through 5 rear tires on this bike and 2 front tires in the time that I have owned this bike. I've been buying the Golden Tire GT 333N for the rear and the 216 AA for the front. Tires are around $100 a piece on average. So, you know, sometimes they're more expensive or less expensive, but I went with $100. So that's $500 in rear tires, $200 in front tires, or $700 total for tires. There were some cosmetic things that I did to the bike early on, like the plastics and seat covers there, so about $44 in plastics, and then $40 for seat covers. Fork seals is another wear item that I've had to do twice now at a cost of about $400 to have that done. I didn't do the work myself. I had a local shop, actually the motor shop, do that work for me, as I just didn't have the tools and didn't feel like purchasing those. So $400 there. Another cost associated with this bike, and particularly these years, I think 19 might have been a little bit better, but it's the suspension, and I am like 190, 195, so I had the bike sprung up to accommodate my weight with gear on and a full hydration pack. And that was about $500 to have the suspension redone, and that's new front springs, fluid, and I think I did bushings at the same time, and also a new rear spring and a new metal collar instead of the plastic one. That made the bike feel a lot better and a lot more planted for my weight, and should definitely be something you should look at doing if you are closer to the 200-pound mark with gear on, as this bike is sprung for a lighter rider. Now the cam chain tensioner, this was something that I did early on. That was about $80, and it just replaces the stock hydraulic one, which is prone to not keeping full tension on the cam chain during fluctuations in throttle or right after startup, and it needs to build pressure. I personally didn't like this, so I replaced it with a Dirtrix one, which keeps the cam chain tensioned the same all the time and has hydraulic pressure too, so it's spring and hydraulic. So like double fail safe, makes the bike run a lot quieter. You hear less clanking from the cam chain, so $80 for that. Chain and sprockets, this is something else that I replaced maybe about a year ago. Depending on how much you ride and what you're riding in, the conditions like mud, sand, and stuff, you'll probably have to do a chain and sprockets within this amount of time. I did, and that was about $130 for that. Front and rear sprocket, new chain, and new chain guides as well. Fluids, outside of oil, that would be like brake fluid and coolant. I think a brake fluid will go pretty far. You'll get quite a few flushes of your brake system out of that. That's about $7 for a thing of Bel-Ray brake fluid. And then coolant was $20 for like a big jug of it, and I've done like 2 full flushes of my coolant system with that so far, and I still have quite a bit left, and that was 20 bucks. So $27 there for those fluids. Now, another big cost for me outside of the suspension was the top end rebuild, and that cost me about $483, which is definitely on the cheaper end to do that work because I did it all myself. The only thing that I had to take somewhere else and have done was the cutting of the exhaust seats again to get those pits out of it, and that was $100 at a local shop. But that $483 covers all of the parts and even some tools that I needed to accomplish that task. Now, I may have done that job a little bit early, but I felt like 190 hours was still stretching it, and it's just better to do it sooner rather than later, else it could cost you a lot more if you need a new cylinder or anything like that. So again, $483 for that work. The fuel tuner, this was something that I just put on. I put on a JD fuel tuner. That was $215. Definitely a worthwhile investment. I will say that TPS adjustment does almost as much as the JD tuner does from a feel perspective in terms of how well the bike runs and the power that you actually feel. But the JD tuner makes the bike run a lot cleaner. You can roll your TPS adjustment back to almost stock levels, and the bike just runs better kind of all around, and then you have some adjustability to it on the fly, which is really nice. So definitely a worthwhile upgrade. Huge improvement over stock power on the bike. Again, $215 for that. Now, valve shims and the manual. The manual is probably something you're going to want early on. I think this is about $40. Super handy to have. It has all of the detailed instructions on all the different parts of working on the bike and taking it apart and torque specs and all of that. I bought that at the same time I bought the valve shims, and I bought a Hot Cams valve shim set, so I could have all of the sizes. That way it'd cover me basically probably through the life of this bike. That was about $80 for all of that, and you're probably going to need to do valve shims at least once, if not twice, within that 200-hour time span. Handguards, 75 bucks. I replaced those really early on. Probably could spend less, you could spend more on those, but I didn't like the standard, just kind of plastic flag style ones. Grips, 25 bucks. I've replaced those once so far, getting ready to replace them again. Muffler packing was $25 as well. Now, this is something that they recommend you do probably more frequently than I did. I've only done it once so far, but that again, 25 bucks for that. A kickstand, so I broke the factory kickstand. The bike, fell over a few times by sinking into the dirt, and I pivoted around on the kickstand a few times, and that just weakened it, and it eventually broke. A Tusk one was $49 for that. Exhaust spring tool, super handy if you're going to repack this exhaust, and also especially handy if you're going to be doing the top end and getting off the head pipe. You're going to need that. It's way better than pliers or anything else. Grease, this is another one. I have some nice Bel-Ray waterproof grease that I bought to do the stem, the steering bearings, and the swing arm and linkage bearings, just to make sure that those are properly greased and clean. You'll probably need to do your steering head bearings as well. They come pretty dry from the factory, and just keeping those nice and greased is going to make them last longer and prevent unneeded wear on those parts. Fuel filters, kind of like a small hidden cost, those should be replaced. I think they say every 15 hours, but I was going much longer on those and never had a problem with it. I just kind of replaced them every 30 to 40 hours or so that's about $28 in those. And then the last cost for me was the wheel bearings. I actually had my rear ones kind of basically seize up not that long ago, so I went ahead and ordered new front and rear wheel bearings from Rocky Mountain ATV at a cost of $36 for those, so pretty cheap, and they should last quite a while, so a relatively small cost for getting 200 hours basically out of the stock ones. Alright, so now that we've ran through all of those items, let's talk about the overall cost. So the overall cost of all of those things that I outlined there was about $3,492. That's a pretty large number. Honestly, I was kind of shocked when I saw that that's kind of how much I've spent on this bike so far outside of the bike itself. But again, I've put a lot of hours on it. It's had like 5 races on it, and I've had a ton of fun on it. So for me, like, that cost is totally justified, and I would do it all over again. The bike still runs just as good as the day it did when I got it. It actually runs better with the fuel tuner and some of the other modifications that have been done to it now. So I'm extremely happy with the bike. And I've had no real major issues with it. Actually, I've had no major issues with it outside of just preventative, regular maintenance. That comes out to about $16.39 per hour. And so that's just with everything that I've done within the extras. The bare minimum that somebody could probably get away with spending on this bike would be about $1,500 to $1,700 over this time, and that's primarily just oil changes, tires, fork seals. You probably have to do fork seals at least once. Chain and sprockets. You probably need to replace your chain and sprockets at least once within the 200-hour time period. Fluids, you should be changing your brake fluid at least once a year, as well as your coolant, and then valve shims and a manual, grease and fuel filters. So that's kind of what encompasses that bare minimum cost, and that comes out to around $7.30 an hour to $8.04 an hour. And I also bumped those oil change intervals up to the 15-hour recommendation that the manual says, so you're saving some costs over what I did by extending that oil change interval. So now I took things just one step further, and I actually figured out roughly how much I've spent on gas on this bike over the ownership. So based off of the miles, I figure I roughly get around 50 miles per gallon or so, 55, somewhere around there. And gas is probably averaged around $4 a gallon for non-ethanol premium over the course of the 2 years. So with like that rough math, that works out to be about 94 gallons of gas, or $376 in gas over those 4,700 miles. And if I lump that into the total that I've spent on the bike, we get $3,868 or $18.50 an hour to have ran this bike for the 213 hours that I put on it thus far. Again, it feels expensive, but the bike feels like it's brand new, and I've done a lot of work to it, both kind of preventative and just to make it run better and suit my weight better. And it feels like a brand new bike still, and it runs incredibly strong, stronger than the day it did when I bought it. And I mean, it's ready for another 200 hours with nothing more than probably valve shims and your oil changes and some of the smaller maintenance items. So again, all justified costs in my opinion. I've loved this bike over the 2 years that I've had it, and I'm definitely looking forward to keeping it for, many more years, hopefully, depending on how much space I have in the garage for future toys. I would like to get into a two-stroke, but that's a whole nother story. But anyways, that's just how the costs have worked out for me and what ownership over the last 2 years have looked like. Certainly things could vary for you, but I hope like this has been informative for you and maybe helped inform a decision on whether to pick up a used one, or maybe you already own one and you're curious. Either way, let me know below kind of what you think in your comments, as well as what other videos you would like to see from us in the future. Sorry we haven't been putting out as much content this year. Obviously, COVID has thrown a wrench in things and was kind of unforeseen. So I'm hoping that once things start opening back up and social distancing measures are kind of less tight, that we can get back out riding and visiting some new areas and kind of resume some normalcy and bring you guys some more content in the future. But yeah, check out some of our other videos and subscribe if you haven't. But yeah, that's kind of all I've got here, so I'll catch you guys in the next video.